Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. One of our tasks here at the Garden Basics podcast is to make gardening easier for you. And today's guest will explain the benefits to your soil and you if you not only don't rototill the soil, but also limit your digging. Garden contrarian and author Robert Couric talks about how to no-dig your way to your best garden ever. Garden pesticides can be really confusing, especially when several different formulations have the same brand name. Our in-house college professor, Debbie Flower, talks about the importance of reading and following label directions now more than ever. Soon, if not already, you're going to be harvesting more from your garden than you know what to do with it all. How about feeding the hungry with all those extra tomatoes, zucchini, peppers, and peaches this summer? We talk with the founder of AmpleHarvest.org, which is connecting overwhelmed gardeners with local food pantries who want your extra fresh fruits and vegetables. It's all part of episode 20 of Garden Basics with Farmer Fred. So put down your shovel, gather a few cherry tomatoes if you have them, and give us a listen. And we're going to do it all in under 30 minutes. Let's go. Well, we're talking to the garden contrarian, Robert Couric, who has a new publication out called No Digging for a Healthier Soil and a Sustainable Garden. Now, I don't know about how you garden, but every season I like to work in compost and fertilizer, worm castings into the soil using double digging, a time-honored process that first came to my attention decades ago from John Jevons of Ecology Action, who wrote the book, How to Grow More Vegetables. And, of course, we've always talked about digging holes for planting. Well, along comes Robert Couric, author of several books, we'll get into those as well, about how no digging is better for a healthier soil and a sustainable garden. Well, once again, Robert, you're making waves.
I first wrote about no-till in my 1986 book, Edible Landscaping Naturally, and I've been proposing it to people ever since, but now the times have caught up with me and it's getting to be more popular.
Well, again, what's old is new again, because you go back even further than John Jevons in researching this by quoting the works of Ruth Stout, author of How to Have a Green Thumb Without an Aching Back, and one book I'm holding in my hand called Gardening Without Work. And her basic philosophy was, hey, just pile some straw on the ground.
She's the grande dame of no-till gardening, but if you read her book carefully, she'll tell you in her book that for 12 years she brought in manure and tilled it in with a tractor. So I think that anybody who's developed their soil for 12 years can probably get away without having to double dig. You know, the double digging is a great way to get going, and I recommend it for people with strong backs early on, but there's no reason to keep doing it. I know one garden, they've been doing it for almost 30 years every year, and they don't need to.
And it's a lot of work.
Yep. Well, what Jevons talks about in double digging the way he does it is you get down to that open trench and you throw the layers forward. You don't invert. And that's the key to no-till, is not inverting the natural strata of bacteria and critters like fungi and actinomycetes and bacteria and algae and all those critters that they prefer the top 1 to 4 inches. And if you turn them down under, they start dying. But the stuff at the bottom that you brought up prefers more anaerobic conditions. They start combusting. So in both directions, you're having a death of the biological activity.
And it's not only biological activity that you point out in this publication, No Digging for a Healthier Soil and a Sustainable Garden. You point out that top few inches is also where the plant roots want to go.
Yep. And in fact, for people who in other climates, it's so amazing. that on a young spruce tree where it rains in the summer, 64% of the roots are above the soil in the duff or mulch, as you call it. And if you don't have that, the top foot of trees is over 50% of the root system.
Well, now I feel real good about what I did at the end of the summer vegetable season here, which was to basically take out the expired plants and then just throw my neighbor's oak leaves that had fallen on top of the beds and let them sit there.
Great. That's a good way to go. Yeah, they make a great mulch, but they also decompose fairly fast, and that way you can improve the soil from the top down. I like to say that nature never made soil bending over.
Yeah, it's a fairly natural process.
But it takes patience. It does take time. If you have a heavy clay soil, it can take a fair number of years to get the soil up to snuff. That's why I like to propose double digging for 1 or 2 years if you can do it, or single digging for 1 to 5 years, and then you get to no-till. But the people that jump right in with no-till in the heavy soil, they have a lot of times failure.
Well, I guess that's why the process of no digging would work best on raised beds, and you go into great detail about that in this publication.
Yeah, the raised bed is the way I prefer to do vegetables and planting trees on mounds, not in planting holes.
And that brings up something I mentioned at the very beginning is you're now advocating don't dig a hole to plant a plant, a shrub or a tree, plant
right.
It on top?
Well, what you do is you take a spading fork and fraction it's there, not inverting it, but leaning forward and back on a spading fork so it makes little fractures. And then you take native soil there in the yard and make a mound 6 to 12 inches high and spread the roots over it and cover it with 2 to 4 inches of soil, but not burying the base of the trunk, and then mulching heavily. And what happens is the roots will grow out of that area faster because you let the top start to dry out in May or June. And the roots will tend to follow the moisture, and it gets them out of the planting area much quicker.
Talk a little bit about this mound. How does it stay together? It seems to me it would fall apart fairly easily.
Oh, well, it's a mound that's pretty subtle. In other words, in my book, I made a mistake of making it look like it's a pimple on the landscape, but I do it in reality with a 6 inches high, but 2 to 3 feet wide, so it's just barely a bump.
Another way you talk about enriching the soil, and this really is contrarian, is leave the underground portions of weeds and just use a scraper to take off the top portions.
Yeah, there's a woman in England who for years had a successful truck farm doing what she called surface cultivation, where you take what's called an onion hoe and kind of scrape below the surface 1 to 4 inches, and that severs the tops of the weeds, their crown, and it allows for you to develop soil without inverting it. And she had a successful farm, and on top of that, she never used manures.
It's called No Digging for a Healthier Soil and a Sustainable Garden. You don't mind if I call you a garden contrarian, do you?
No, that's no problem.
Okay, because you are. It's Robert Couric, and for people who want more information about this, where can they go?
They can go to my website, robertcouric.com, Kourik, or you can Google edible landscape naturally, and you'll get to my webpage.
All right, robertcouric.com is the website, and check out his other books that he has there. Excellent books about, he takes the mystery out of drip irrigation as well as the role that roots play in plants.
Yep, I really spent a lot of time with roots.
There you go. It's No Digging for a Healthier Soil and a Sustainable Garden. Robert Couric is the author. Check it out. Robert, thanks for a few minutes of your time.
Hey, it was great. I enjoyed it a lot.
I'm proud to have Smart Pots as a sponsor of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. I like their products. I use their products. I would buy their products again. What exactly, you might be asking, is a Smart Pot? It is the original award-winning fabric planter. It's sold worldwide, and it's all made right here in the United States of America. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes, too. They can be reused year after year. Go to their website and check out all that they offer and get a lot more information about Smart Pots. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers as well as select Ace and True Value stores nationwide. They're also available at Amazon.com. And I tell you what, if you visit their website, smartpots.com/Fred, you can get a nice discount if you buy those Smart Pots on Amazon. Check it out. It's smartpots.com/Fred for your discount on Smart Pots. It's the original award-winning fabric planter made right here in the USA. But wait, we've got more. How would you like to win your own Smart Pot? From now through June 30th, one lucky winner can qualify to receive Smart Pot's 6-foot long bed. It's a fabric container large enough to hold over 10 cubic feet of soil. It's 16 inches tall, 16 inches wide, 6 feet long. That's enough room for a couple of tomato plants and a couple of pepper plants, or one fantastic display of summer flowers. We'll award the Smart Pot long bed to the best comment or review about the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast that you post at the podcast service where you're listening to this show. And by best comment, don't kiss up. I don't necessarily mean the kindest comment, just the most creative comment. So when you're done listening to the show, leave a comment wherever you're listening. You just might get yourself the Smart Pot 6-foot long bed. We'll announce the winner on the July 3rd edition of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. Oh, you can be kind if you want to. Here on the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, we like to answer your questions. I like to bring in the big guns to answer the questions. That would be retired horticultural professor Debbie Flower, college professor for decades. And Debbie, a cat writes in and says they have a rental with a lawn, or at least it used to be a lawn. She says, a couple of years ago, I asked about the lawn of one of our rentals where the landscape guy sprayed the lawn and killed it. Now we have new tenants with kids, and the spring growth of weeds was great, but grass won't grow, even with watering. There is a couple of feet of sod we plopped down. It seems to be growing now. Any thoughts, she asks?
Well, one question for Kat would be, what Roundup did she use? What pesticide was used on her lawn that killed it in the first place? If it was something with the brand name Roundup, it could be many different products. All pesticides by law have to have a certain number of things on the label. And the word Roundup is a brand name. And the brand Roundup has many different chemicals, many different useful chemicals that they sell under that brand name. And so when you go to buy the chemical, that you have to know what you want it to do and in what situation. And then you have to read the label to find out if it's going to do that thing for you in that situation. So the Roundup that has been around, I think, the longest is a chemical that says on the label it's a weed and grass killer and it kills the roots. But there are other Roundups now, and one of them, for instance, called Roundup Max Control 365, says on the front of the bottle, kills vegetation for up to 12 months. And if you look further down, or sometimes it's on the back, you also find a list of active ingredients. The active ingredient in the Roundup that just kills weed and grass is glyphosate. The active ingredient on the Roundup Max Control 365 that kills vegetation for up to 12 months has glyphosate in it, but it also has another chemical called imazapic. And imazapic is something we call a pre-emergent. So the glyphosate will kill the weeds and kills the grass and kills the roots. But the imazapic, which is a second ingredient in the Roundup Max Control 360, is a pre-emergent, and it prevents things from growing. And that's what kills the vegetation for up to 12 months. It's that additional chemical that's in that bottle. So the advice to the wise is to read the label. At least read that what's called a statement of general use. Does it just kill weeds and grass, including the roots, or does it kill vegetation for up to 12 months? There's a big difference there.
The problem I see is the fact that Roundup is in big print on the front of the label, and people going down the aisle and seeing a product called Roundup says, oh, there's some Roundup. I will get that. Not realizing there are now different formulations of Roundup, and they've added another one to their arsenal that is basically a broadleaf weed killer for lawns, too, to add even more confusion. So this is how Roundup is kind of like Kleenex.
Yes.
Kleenex has become a word meaning facial tissue, but we use Kleenex instead of saying facial tissue.
Yes, and Kleenex is a brand.
And Kleenex is a brand, exactly, just like Roundup is a brand. But
right.
if you said, please pass the Kleenex, somebody could pass you a wet wipe. And you would say, what's this? This isn't Kleenex. And you would say, yes, it is. It's a Kleenex brand wet wipe.
Right.
So, yes, read and follow all label directions.
On pesticides. It's so important. And make that fertilizers, too.
Let's add a little scenic bypass to this. You used the word pesticides, and a lot of people think, oh, I thought we were talking weeds, not bugs. But the word pesticide is actually a general, all-encompassing term for something that causes death.
Yes, anything we consider a pest in the garden. And a pest is something we don't want there. And so, yes, there are insects that we don't want there. There are also insects we do want there. But there are plants we don't want there. Those are weeds. And there are plants that we do want there. In fact, I think there are more chemicals used to control weeds in the garden than there are chemicals or use of chemicals to control other problems in the garden. Weeds are so common and so frequent. We get rid of them, they come back. We get rid of them, they come back. That in general, we use more chemicals to control weeds in the garden than we do to control other types of pests. So weeds are considered a pest.
And we should point out that when we say the term pesticides, that's inclusive of insecticides, herbicides, of which Roundup is, fungicides, molluscides. Did I leave anybody out?
Well, a pesticide, yes, includes an herbicide, which herb is a plant, and acide means killer. Insect is an insect, and acide is a killer, insect killer. So a mollusk is a slug or snail. So fungicide kills fungus. There's bactericides, which kill bacteria. There are all kinds of acides. Miticides, right. Miticides are basically arachnids or spider, 8-legged things that crawl around in the garden. Yes, there are many, many different types of pest killers, and they all fall under that category of pesticide.
Once again, we've muddled through and maybe solved somebody's problem. But if anything, I think the bottom line we're trying to get across here is read and follow all label directions.
Yes, very important.
Debbie Flower, thanks so much for your help.
My pleasure.
We're talking with Gary Oppenheimer. He's with ampleharvest.org. He's the founder. It's a unique nationwide resource that is eliminating the waste of food, the outcome being a reduction in hunger and malnutrition, along with an improved environment. There's something like 42 million Americans who grow food in home gardens, community gardens, and they're small farmers as well, who could easily donate their excess harvest to one of over 8,600 registered local food pantries spread across all 50 states. And Gary, I want to tell you, first of all, about my experience with your website, ampleharvest.org. There is a page there where you can go and find the food pantry nearest you. And I set a search of 15-mile radius around my house. And up popped, I'm counting 14 food pantries I never knew existed, including one that is within walking distance. And it's amazing how easy it could be for people who have an excess of tomatoes or squash or peppers or melons or fruit, where to take it to and how convenient that is. What was your inspiration, Gary, for starting ampleharvest.org?
That's a great question, actually. There are two pieces of inspiration. One was I grew up with don't waste food. My grandparents always told me, finish what's on your plate. Kids are starving in Europe. So not wasting food was always inculcated into me. As an adult and a master gardener, I was growing more food than I can use, and I struggled to find a place to donate the food to. It turns out I found a battered women's shelter in my town. I'm in northern New Jersey. But when I had gone on Google to find out where are their food pantries, Google said the nearest one was 25 miles away in another city. And I had an epiphany in March of 2009, and I realized, wait a minute, this is an information problem. This is not a food problem. People aren't hungry because America doesn't have enough food. We actually throw away half the produce, never gets consumed. The problem gardeners across America have always had was missing information. The misinformation was what we were all told at food drives, that you can only donate jars or cans or boxes, but no fresh food. We gardeners took away from that. You can't donate the extra tomatoes. The missing information was where is a food pantry and what's a good day of the week and time of day to donate it. When I realized that this was the information problem, I realized the solution was a web-based, an internet-based program that would both educate gardeners about their capacity, that they can indeed donate food, and to where to donate it near them, and the optimum day of the week and time of day. And that timing is super important, because if a food pantry, for argument's sake, was distributing food to hungry families on Sunday afternoons, the ideal time for you to bring it in is Sunday morning, which means the ideal time for you to harvest is either Sunday morning or Saturday night. So the food would go from your garden to the food pantry to a hungry family in hours. And the whole thing came together for me in a 4-hour session on my computer. And 7 weeks later, with the help of 2 volunteers, May 18th, 2009, Ample Harvest.org rolled out. And it's been growing in reach and impact ever since.
We're going to be using a couple of terms here that people may get confused. I find it confusing as well, and maybe you can explain it. We will be talking about food banks and food pantries. What is the difference?
Oh, this is a fun question. All right. For most of America, for all of America, a food bank is a large industrial warehouse type operation. There are around 200 of them in America. They're part of the Feeding America network. And these are large warehouses where large amounts of food come in, and large amounts of food are then redistributed out to the local programs where hungry families go. Those local programs where hungry families go, there are around 33,500 across America, are usually called a food pantry, and in some states a food cupboard or food shelf or food closet.
AmpleHarvest.org is geared to a wide range of gardeners. You've got home gardeners, new gardeners, farmers and food producers, master gardeners, and school gardens. And boy, I'm thinking about food waste, and all of a sudden, wow, school gardens. I wonder what they're doing with all that excess food that they're growing in their little school, especially when it may be happening in the summertime and there isn't anybody there to harvest it.
School gardens, you're absolutely right. It's also camp gardens, by the way. But a school garden, you've planted the stuff, and then the kids are gone for the summer, and who's harvesting? By the way, as do other places that don't think of themselves as gardens. You might have a golf course that has citrus fruits raining down. You might have a public park, for example. So there's lots and lots of opportunity for food to be donated from different places. The work we're doing is to enable as much wholesome, healthy, fresh, locally grown food to get to food pantries as possible, because that not only reduces hunger across America, but it also improves the nation's health and well-being. The healthier your diet, obviously, the healthier you are.
I always believe that the word pharmacy should be spelled Pharmacy, because healthy, homegrown, fresh farm food is one of the best ways to get your health back.
Absolutely. And when you think about two of the leading causes of ill health in America are obesity and diabetes, which are both costly in terms of your own well-being and costly in terms of just the medical care involved. Those are both diet-impacted diseases. You improve the diet, you reduce those diseases, you have a healthier and, frankly, by extension, a wealthier nation.
One of the categories you have that you're appealing to is called new gardeners, but there's a subset of that we were talking about before the interview called the accidental gardener, and they can also participate with ampleharvest.org.
Yeah, I wrote a blog article about that earlier this year, the accidental gardener, and people ask, well, what's an accidental gardener? Either you're a gardener or you're not. And I had realized that if you buy a house and the house came with a fruit tree that somebody previously planted, apples, oranges, what have you, you may not think of yourself as a gardener if you don't get your fingers dirty and garden. But the reality is that every year the tree is raining down on you all this wonderful food, the apples and the oranges or what have you. And so I describe that person as the accidental gardener. That person, too, has the opportunity to donate the food. And I also want to give you one other number subject to change. You started this with saying there are 42 million gardeners in America. That's pre-COVID. The data we're now seeing from partners in the industry speaks to 58 million people, and it may well be growing higher as millions more people start their own gardens. And I strongly believe that when we get past COVID-19, most of the people who started gardening are going to continue to garden. That means more people gardening and more healthy, fresh food for the hungry families on a permanent basis. Look, one of the things really important, when you grow a garden, and I have my own garden, you're growing it for your own enjoyment and for your own family. You should be enjoying that food first. The food, however, that you grow that's in excess of what you can use or preserve or share with friends should never be going to waste. That's the food that should be donated to a local food pantry. And by the way, also the amount of surplus is not terribly important either. Don't feel bad. I only got 5 tomatoes to donate. Donate your 5 tomatoes. It'll be commingled with all the other people with 5 tomatoes and 500 pounds of tomatoes at the table. The important thing is that the food is eaten by somebody and nourishes somebody in the community. It's good for the community. Frankly, it's good for the planet because food waste is a contributing factor to climate change. And it's a wonderful way of people helping their neighbors in need by reaching into their backyards when they can't afford to reach into their back pocket. Today, we are at work, as you had said, in 50 states, in about 4,200 communities. And today, we're approaching 9,000 food pantries, which is about a quarter of America's food pantries, which is great. That means we have 3/4 of America's food pantries to yet reach, engage, and work with those surrounding gardeners. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, and your dollars certainly get us a long way towards succeeding on that.
If you've got excess food, you know where to go. Ampleharvest.org will aim you to the food pantry nearest you. Gary Oppenheimer is the founder of Ampleharvest.org. Gary, thanks for a few minutes of your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. Everybody, please stay safe. And I'll leave you with one final note. In these COVID time, we have guidance on the site for the gardener on how to be COVID safe when they're both growing the food for themselves and making the donation of food. So when you come to ampleharvest.org, take a moment, read the couple of bullet points on there. That'll keep you, the food, and the food pantry staff safe so that the good you're doing really is good and nobody gets sick. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks for listening to Garden Basics with Farmer Fred, brought to you by Smart Pots. Garden Basics comes out every Tuesday and Friday. It's available on many podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeart, Stitcher, and many more. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave a comment or a rating. That helps us decide which garden topics you'd like to see addressed. And again, thank you.